Cadlia also didn't return to her senses for a few seconds. She never expected Emperor Rosel's secret mausoleum to involve the abyss. However, after some careful thought, she realized that it wasn't surprising that a conflict at that level would involve something like that. For a moment, she hoped that the queen wouldn't pursue this matter, but in the end, she suppressed this thought to the bottom of her heart. She felt that if it were her, then she would also make the same choice. All sorts of thoughts flashed through her mind as she bowed towards the end of the long, model table. "Thank you for your answer. I have no further questions today." The fool nodded slightly and surveyed the area. "You may begin." Just as he finished speaking, Furs, who had been mustering her courage all this while, said as she closed her eyes as though she had resolved herself to charge towards death, "Mr. World, I have a commission for you." Seeing the World Gehrman Sparrow look over, she hurriedly explained, "You don't have to do much. You'll just leave me at an unfamiliar place every once in a while, and you can pick me up after a few days. If you're really busy, you can present traveling to me several times at a particular point in time for me to record." Upon hearing Miss Magician's words, the first thought that came to Klein's mind was, man versus wild. "I have too many suitable places, such as the battlefield of the gods on the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, Calderon City in the spirit world, the City of Miracles Liveseed in Grosel's travels. They're 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times more dangerous than the wilderness. I'm just afraid that Miss Magician won't be able to handle the danger." Klein didn't let the World Gehrman Sparrow immediately answer. He controlled the fake person and cast its gaze on Miss Magician with a pressuring look. Furs silently took a deep breath, calmed her emotions, and added in more detail, "This is the thing, I'm a Sequence 6 scribe of the apprentice pathway now. In order to digest the potion, aside from recording all kinds of beyonder powers, I still need to record down the local customs and traditions of different places. I hope that I can become a traveler as soon as possible. Only then can I avoid most of the dangers during the war. Mr. World, I've only recorded traveling once, so I won't be able to return if I go somewhere else. I can only ask for your help. I wonder if you're interested, and what kind of payment you'd wish to receive." So that's how it is. Justice Audrey finally came to a realization. Furthermore, she felt that Furz's method was really great. Especially since she's a best-selling novel author, her act of recording scenery and customs and publishing it as a book should be able to greatly aid in her potion digestion rate. Audrey nodded silently as she felt sincerely happy for her friend. However, as a senior spectator, how could she not sense Furz's horror and fear towards Mr. World? She was looking forward to knowing what would happen when the two of them formally interacted. "Audrey, this state of mind isn't good. However, this is the attitude of a spectator. Furs definitely wouldn't expect that the so-called crazy adventurer she fears is only a mask. Beneath it is a gentle and kind heart. I also have to work hard to digest the Dreamwalker potion. I should visit the dreams surrounding me every night." Audrey didn't show any changes in her expression or gaze as she maintained the attitude of a spectator. After the hanged man Alger heard the magician's words, he sighed. This was because even this apprentice was beginning to break through to Sequence 5, while he was still stuck at that level. The world and the hermit are already at Sequence 4, Justice, the sun, the moon, and the star are also all at Sequence 5. Apart from the magician, the newly joined judgment is lower than my sequence. As his thoughts churned, Alger felt that stifled, a heavy feeling that was difficult to resolve. He wished he could immediately find an opportunity to make contributions and become a demigod, a cataclysmic interrer. He yearned to have a high position and be in a position of power. He wanted others to acknowledge and respect him and be submissive to him. He didn't wish to fall behind in the tarot club. Is that so? At the same time that Klein understood what Miss Magician was thinking, he suddenly recalled something. It was the identity that the other party had mentioned in front of Mr. Fool during a particular full moon. An ex-surgeon who was now a novelist. Will spreading the terrifying legends that I create into text form help me digest the bizarro sorcerer potion further? The more shocking, harrowing, terrifying, and incomprehensible the description in the novel is, the better the effects. Klein suddenly had inspiration and controlled the world German Sparrow to say, "This commission is very simple, but the payment I need is very special." Upon hearing that Mr. World was inclined to agree, Furs asked in both joy and anxiousness, "What's the payment?" The world German Sparrow pondered for a moment and said, "Collect information about the ghost stories that have happened recently in the various major hospitals in Backland, and write them into a small publication or have them published in the newspapers. The requirement for the novel is that it's even more terrifying and bizarre. It's best if it can be a best-selling novel." The reason why he only mentioned the matters of the major hospitals in Backland was because Miss Magician was a local author who was part of medical circles. Being able to come to know of the urban myths and use that as material for a novel was very reasonable, and it wouldn't incur suspicion. However, if she had even learned of the urban myths in the Rörsted Archipelago, Fog Sea, and East and West Balam, then Zaratl's marionette would definitely visit her. The ghost tales of the various hospitals in Backland. After hearing the world German Sparrow's words, Audrey was stunned for nearly 3 seconds. She had originally thought that those rumors were caused by the church's beyonders secretly treating the injured victims. Mushroom and weeds were the negative effects of the mystical items, but she never expected it to be something else. Audrey had also guessed if it was done by Dwayne Dantes. After all, this gentleman had heard from her about the victims of the air raid. Furthermore, he was a very kind gentleman. However, due to the lack of clues and evidence, she could only believe that it was more likely to be related to the church. At this moment, she was almost certain that the clown angel was Mr. World German Sparrow. Even if it wasn't, they definitely had a deep connection. A Mr. World who wears a mushroom and weed mask is the same as the German Sparrow who wears a crazy adventurer mask. Why does he act like that when he's doing something good? Is it because he needs the feeling or corresponding feedback from creating fear? Audrey thought to herself with some guesses. As for the star Leonard and the hanged man Alger, one immediately thought of the strange urban myths that the Nighthawks who belonged to St. Samuel Cathedral were discussing recently, while the other fell deep into thought about the horror stories his subordinates had heard or encountered. I've never really heard of such payment before. It's not like I'm writing a biography. Although there has been a recent war, the sales of newspapers and novels seem to have increased. My previous editor has been urging me to write a new book. Yes, I must keep my identity a secret. I have to convince my editor to change my pen name. The excuse is that novels of different styles should use different pen names. Furs didn't think too much about it. After a slight period of deliberation, she agreed, "All right, no problem." The world German Sparrow chuckled and hoarsely said, "If you do well, I'll give you the opportunity to record the beyonder powers of a demigod." "No problem." Furs swept away her usual languidness and firmly replied. To her, recording a demigod's powers not only increased her ability to protect herself, but it could also effectively help her digest the potion. This also made Audrey, Zio, Leonard and the other members sigh in their hearts. Scribes were truly enviable. Once a demigod-level expert became a backer, a scribe wielded extremely powerful strength. They wouldn't be weaker than a sequence 5, or may even be stronger than one at times. After coming to an agreement, the scene fell silent for a moment. This was because the other members of the Tarot Club currently didn't have any requirements. Leonard had become a spirit warlock recently, and he had yet to conclude the acting principles. There was still the possibility of him advancing from within the Church of Evernight. As for mystical items, he had already bought the Word of the Sea. If there were any special circumstances, he could request to use sealed artifacts of the Church. Emlyn was reading the Sanguine's research information regarding the Moon Domain every day, hoping to make a Scarlet Scholar more practical. As for the Sequence 4 Shaman King's potion formula and beyonder ingredients, he didn't need them for an extensive period of time, nor could he afford them. Derek had recently mastered the powers of Priest of Light, and he was still very far from advancing. As for the unshadowed main ingredient, he had already obtained it. Similarly, Audrey and Zio had also recently advanced. One of them was working hard to help Mr. World, accumulating contribution points, while the other was burdened with a huge debt and was eager to repay it. Alger was in the Church of the Lord of Storms, so he had to keep a secret. He was currently in an awkward position which required him to find a chance to advance. Furthermore, he had obtained the Cataclysmic Interr's potion formula from the world. Catlia had just become a demigod. She was currently deep in research on all kinds of secrets and all sorts of mysticism knowledge. She was pleasantly surprised that, despite having recently advanced, just recalling the knowledge and secrets she knew from the past had allowed her to directly digest quite a bit of the potion. Amongst them, the various things she had heard from the Tarot Club had contributed greatly. The transaction segment quickly ended as the members began their free exchange. Emlyn surveyed the area and his gaze landed on Leonard's face. If you're an official Beyonder, how will you deal with a clergyman of an opposing faction in your area of jurisdiction? He hasn't done anything wrong, nor does he plan on doing anything wrong. Although Fainapotter had yet to start a war with Lone, they had invaded Lone's ally, Lenberg. This made the believers and citizens living around the Harvest Church look at Bishop Yutravsky in an increasingly odd manner. Leonard thought carefully and said, "Protective custody." Protective custody. That's quite a witty answer. As expected of a newly promoted Red Gloves team captain. When the fool Klein heard the star Leonard's answer, he couldn't help but laugh inwardly. He knew very well who Emlyn was referring to, and he knew quite a bit about Bishop Yutravsky, who wished to be called a priest. He didn't really believe Emlyn White's claim that he hasn't done anything wrong, nor does he plan on doing anything wrong. This was because, to a deity's blessed or a zealot, their understanding of something wrong might be different from a normal person's. Of course, Klein never suspected Father Yutravsky's claim that life was precious and his piousness an acknowledgement of a joyous harvest, but the problem was that the Church of Earth Mother also preached that lives were like plants, which would ultimately wither and die, returning to the embrace of the Earth Mother. They would then grow again when the next year came. A qualified bishop of the Church of Earth Mother wouldn't treat death in the same manner as the most ordinary of people. Regardless, Father Yutravsky has to be controlled. This is both a form of protection for the Earth Mother's believers, as well as the citizens around him. It's also a form of protection for this half-giant bishop, in case some irredeemable situation occurs. While Klein was thinking to himself, Leonard, who had no lack of understanding of the Harvest Church, also understood the meat of Emlyn's question. He planned on leading his team members to confirm the situation in the next 2 days, taking the Earth Mother's blessed into protective custody with the help of the official organizations that were in charge of the area south of the bridge. And when Emlyn heard the answer, he slowly nodded without saying a word. Seeing that he was silent, Leonard turned to ask a question he wanted to get some feedback on. Are there any major matters lurking beneath Backlund recently? What he really wanted to ask was why his Red Gloves team had been left behind in the capital of capitals as a part of the reserve forces. As soon as he finished speaking, the other members of the Tarot Club, including the son Derek, who wasn't too concerned about matters of the outside world, all cast their gazes at the world Gehrman Sparrow. From what they knew, whenever something happened in Backlund, Mr. World would more or less give a warning. What major matters has been lurking beneath Backlund recently? There's plenty. The Black Emperor ritual of George III, my secret alliance with Queen Mystic, the 3 churches may seem to be tacitly in approval but all have different attitudes. As Klein's thoughts raced, he suddenly understood what Leonard wanted to ask. After all, they would occasionally communicate privately. That's right. Why was Leonard left in Backlund? Because of me, the church doesn't want to put Leonard in a dangerous situation. Am I thinking too highly of myself? Klein secretly shook his head and rejected the thought that first came to him. He quickly changed his train of thought and analyzed the problem on matters that Leonard could be of service. Leonard is only a sequence 5, so what use can he play in backland that has deep undercurrents? Even if he's of use, they wouldn't use him. Instead, they would make use of me, who's related to him, or Palez Zoroast. This can rule me out. I'm still a qualified blessed at the moment. If I really needed to do anything, then a simple instruction would suffice. The clearing of the Amon avatars in Backland last time made the goddess or the upper echelons of the church guess that Palez Zoroast is hiding in the vicinity of Baklund Street, and they ended up suspecting Leonard. There's a possibility, and it's not a low one either. Back then, I was concerned to some extent. I only believed that, in the case of Amon becoming a god, the church and Palez Zoroast were on the same page, that they could form some sort of tacit understanding. In fact, I believe that grandpa had such considerations when he first chose Leonard as a target for parasitizing. But why is Palez Zoroast being kept in Backland? To fish for Amon. Even among the kings of angels, Amon ranks among the top. It's almost impossible for the goddess to engage in a divine descent. With the church's angels, grade 0 sealed artifacts, and Palez Zoroast, it shouldn't be difficult to expel Amon, but it's almost impossible to kill him, unless he doesn't come with his actual body. But in that case, it's not worth making such arrangements. Klein's thoughts quickly developed, and soon, he had a new idea: fishing for Amon isn't done so as to deal with him. Instead, it's to hold back Zeradal, who's currently in Backland. Similar pathways could be interchanged at high levels. Even if one became a true god at sequence 0, they still have a strong desire for the uniqueness and sequence 1 beyonder characteristics of neighboring pathways. On this point, the Evernight goddess's plan was excellent evidence. The goddess wants to make Backland into a potpourri mess before wiping them all out. Klein made the world Gehrman Sparrow hesitate for a few seconds before saying, the leader of the secret order, a sequence 1 angel, and an old friend of Emperor Roselle, Zeradal, is currently hiding in Backland. Seeing that the members of the Tarot Club were clearly a little confused and perplexed, the world added in a hoarse voice, the law of beyonder characteristics conservation we often refer to often refers to the conservation of beyonder characteristics of neighboring pathways. In other words, similar pathways also obey the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics. Leonard immediately fell into deep thought. After a few seconds, he deliberated and asked, the Marauder and the Seer pathways are neighboring pathways? Yes, the Apprentice pathway is also a neighboring pathway, the world answered frankly. Upon hearing their conversation, Furs first connected the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics to the attraction between beyonder characteristics taught to her by her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. She connected it to the Saint of Secrets who had been attracted. Then, she began to consider a question. If it really is as Mr. World said, that beyonder characteristics of neighboring pathways attract one another, then would it have attracted the attention of Zeradal back then? After all, he is in Backland. All of a sudden, Furs thought of the raven that was staring at Bodhisa's back. Ah! Furs hurriedly raised her hand, indicating that she had something to say. Seeing all the members looking over, she hurriedly said, my teacher is a member of the Abraham family. He wields a rather important sealed artifact. As the first part of the sentence was known by the other members other than the star, Furs had no intention of hiding anything. As for the second half of the sentence, she had made some modifications. It was very important to change the phrase to rather important. Seeing that no one was raising any questions, Furs continued, this causes him to occasionally encounter high-sequence beyonders of the apprentice pathway. Previously, when he came to Backland, the Aurora Order's Saint of Secrets, Bodhis, had appeared nearby. As for me, I noticed that a raven was looking in the direction where Bodhis was heading. A raven. The details of the foggy town surfaced in Klein's mind. At the top of the pitch-black cathedral, there were ravens flying around, as if they were holding a memorial or in grief. As for Zeradal's avatar, it was hidden inside the cathedral. Zeradal is used to using ravens as marionettes. Is this a mark left behind during his phase as a bizarro sorcerer? While in thought, Klein made the world speak, that might very well be Zeradal. I actually met a Sequence 1 angel. Furs felt a sense of fear and horror. She then recalled how she and Zio had discussed Adam and thus ended up possibly targeted. For some reason, she had the illusion that she had become the protagonist of a novel. Despite being only a Sequence 7 or 6, she had established connections with the kings of angels and Sequence 1 angels. With this in mind, Furs hurriedly turned her head to Miss Justice and said, "Can you hypnotize me later into forgetting certain matters? I'm afraid that I might accidentally recall something and attract attention." "No problem." As Audrey answered, she glanced at Zio and nodded at her. As for the star Leonard, he had some ideas as well. He planned on discussing it with Bold Man when he returned to hear his opinion. Klein didn't continue talking about the major matters that lurked beneath Backlund. This was because they were just too high-end for the other members of the Tarot Club. Not only were they unable to participate in it directly, but even having a complete understanding of them could bring about a disaster upon themselves. In this aspect, Klein's idea was that he could get the help of the members of the Tarot Club in certain segments, but it was like commissioning a bounty hunter to do something, without getting them too involved in the matter and figuring out the reason for the commission. It was a form of protection for them. At this moment, Alger looked around and said, "According to my observations, the Church of Storms isn't too enthusiastic about this war." "They aren't too enthusiastic. This doesn't match the image of the Church of the Lord of Storms. Although their teachings don't advocate combat and don't promote war, they definitely emphasize the need to treat their enemies like a storm, and vent whatever anger they have on the spot." When Klein heard this, he felt a little surprised. He then combined his understanding of the deities and began his preliminary analysis. "According to my previous speculations, Storm, Sun, Reader, Spectator, and Shepherd can switch paths at high levels. There should be an immense conflict between them. As for the Lord of Storms, he is highly likely the Wind Angel of yesteryear. He had eaten Adam's father, the ancient sun god, the City of Silver creator. Even if he had tacitly allowed George III to become Black Emperor, it's impossible for him to sit back and watch Adam make use of the flood of the times to ascend to divinity. Therefore, the Church of the Lord of Storms is unwilling to have the war increase in scope and allow it to turn into a world war. Hence, he is trying hard to control his impulse. It must be really hard on them. This can explain why Lone and Intis would maintain their strange silence when Feynapotter invaded Lenberg, Mason, and Seeger. The Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun and the Church of the Lord of Storms are probably in a difficult position. They're unable to make up their minds. On the one hand, at the level of the deities, it isn't that there is no possibility of abandoning their alliance to deal with the Church of Knowledge. On the other hand, the battle strategies at the national level also prompts them to protect those countries. Forcefully breaking the perceptions built up by the citizens of a country, would be an act that causes the anchors to become unstable. Also, once they participate in the battle, they would help Adam fulfill the conditions of his advancement to Sequence 0. Klein deliberately made the world silent for a moment before replying to the Hanged Man's intelligence. At present, this is inevitable. T. Klein didn't actually remember if he had told the Hanged Man and the others that the Sailor, Spectator, Sun, Reader and Secret Suppliant pathways were interchangeable, unless he used dream divination to recall it. However, since the Hanged Man had expressed his doubts towards the Church of the Lord of Storms, it meant that he hadn't thought about the interchangeability of both paths regardless of whether he knew it or not, or if he had yet to connect the two matters together. Klein believed that there was a need for him to explain things clearly. This allowed the members of the Tarot Club to grasp the true stances of the various major factions, thus letting them avoid many dangers. After the Hanged Man, Alger, and the others cast their gazes at him, he controlled the world Gehrman Sparrow and made him say in a low, uncertain tone, "The Storm, Sun, Spectator, Reader, and Secret Suppliant pathways are neighboring pathways. Likewise for Evernight, god of combat and death. And neighboring pathways often become enemies. Of course, that's not absolute. At least the 7 deities have established an alliance. Upon hearing the world's reply, Alger first recalled Adam pushing for the flood of the times to become a god. Following that, thoughts flashed through his mind as he gained a certain level of understanding of the Church of the Lord of Storm's current attitude. This made him feel a rather special sense of superiority and joy. It was as if he had seen the essence of the matter, exceeding the level of most beyonders in the Church of the Lord of Storms. Similarly, Audrey had a brand new understanding of Intis's strange silence in this war. She was even more worried about the situation in Lenberg, Mason, and Seeger. In addition, she also knew that she could switch to Unshadowed, Cataclysmic Inter, and to the corresponding sequence for Demigod of the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom she had recently met. As for the corresponding sequence 4 of the Secret Suppliant Pathway, it wasn't within her considerations at all. Of course, compared to other pathways, she still preferred Manipulator. She liked the Spectator pathway from the bottom of her heart. However, she also felt deep fear towards the upper echelons of the Spectator pathway. Vin Rambus had left a rather bad impression on her. Adam's any mention of it will be known had left her with a trauma. She had no choice but to undergo self-evaluations and treat the corresponding problems from time to time. The hermit Catlia had always been deeply knowledgeable about such matters. Apart from the information mentioned by the World Gehrman Sparrow, she also knew that the Mystery Prior and Savant pathways were neighboring pathways that could be interchanged at high sequences. It was likewise for the Arbiter and Lawyer pathways, the Prisoner and Criminal pathways, the Hunter and Assassin pathway, and the Planter and Apothecary pathway. As the other members of the Tarot Club dispersed their thoughts, Alger said to the World Gehrman Sparrow, "Thank you for your answer." He didn't say exactly what insights he had gleaned from the answer. In fact, for an instant, Alger wanted to leave the Church of the Lord of Storms and switch to another pathway. This was better than waiting for a very slim chance in the Church. However, he ultimately gave up on this idea. After all, his goal for a long time was to become a cardinal of the Church of the Lord of Storms. At present, he was beginning to yearn to be ranked first amongst the cardinal ranks, becoming an angel in charge of the mandated punishers or ascetics. As for the position of pontiff, Alger didn't yearn for it. This was because it was too close to the Lord of Storms, and he had many secrets he kept close to his chest. If he were to be chosen as pontiff, Alger suspected that he would be smote to ashes by a lightning storm that descended from the sky the moment he put on the papal tiara. Seeing that the exchange between the world and the hanged man had ended, Emlyn asked with curiosity, "Which pathway can the apothecary pathway be interchanged with?" Being from the sanguine race made them have no thoughts of switching to other pathways, as it would often mean that they had lost their identify. Therefore, Emlyn wasn't too concerned about such matters. "The planter pathway of the Church of Earth Mother," Catlia answered casually. "The planter pathway. Possessed by the Church of Earth Mother." Emlyn frowned as he vaguely grasped something. At this moment, Zio also asked, "Which pathway neighbors the Arbiter pathway?" "Lawyer," Catlia answered simply. "Lawyer of the Black Emperor pathway." In other words, if I could become a Sequence 5, one would be able to switch to Sequence 4 of the Black Emperor pathway. And Furs had previously told me that Mr. Fool has the card of blasphemy. It contains all the secrets of the Black Emperor pathway. Zio suddenly realized that there was a glimmer of light for her future. It had to be known that the Arbiter pathway was firmly controlled by the 2 royal families. Even the corresponding military only had the potion formula for the low and mid sequences. If they wanted to advance beyond Sequence 5, they had to receive a bestowment from the royal family. Just like how every general had to be conferred by the king or queen. Furthermore, what they obtained in the end was the concocted potion and the ritual. To Zio, this meant that it was almost impossible for her to get the Sequence 4 potion formula for the Arbiter pathway. Of course, no matter how tightly guarded the potion formulas was, there were bound to be loopholes. The military's demigods knew of the ritual, and from time to time, they would cooperate with the royal family to hunt powerful supernatural beings. They could roughly narrow down the candidates for the main ingredient to a small area, but this also meant that they could only confirm the formula through repeated experiments. At the same time, the military demigods were also unable to grasp the supplementary ingredients. If they wanted to rely only on the main ingredients to advance, they needed to seek out the benediction of fate. And now, Zio had seen another possibility. At this moment, Audrey had already summarized the neighboring pathways that Mr. World and Ma'am Hermit had mentioned before, thoughtfully asking, among prisoner, criminal, hunter, assassin, savant, mystery prior, and monster, which ones are neighboring similar pathways. The World Gairman Sparrow glanced at the hermit and replied hoarsely, prisoner and criminal, hunter and assassin, and savant and mystery prior are similar pathways that can be interchanged at high sequences. This was knowledge that could be confirmed by Klein. Among them, the interchangeability between prisoner and criminal was something mentioned by the Red Angel evil spirit, to which Miss Sharon tacitly accepted. The interchangeability between savant and mystery prior had been personally demonstrated by Emperor Roselle. As for hunter and assassin, it was information that he had accumulated over time which could finally be confirmed. What about monster? There's only this one left. Furs, who was listening, couldn't help but ask. Seeing the world remain silent, Catlia thought for a moment before saying, it's difficult to be categorized as a neighbor of any other beyonder pathway. Just like fate, it can only objectively exist alone. I can be sure of that. I can only say that the most fundamental order in our world's supernatural powers might be chaos and disharmony. The reason why Catlia was certain that the monster pathway didn't have the means to be interchanged with other pathways was because her advancement ritual required her to analyze the snake of fate's blood. I see. Audrey was slightly uncomfortable with this disharmonious situation, but she quickly adjusted her state of mind. After the exchange was almost complete, all the members of the Tarot Club looked at the son Derek. The youth said without any hesitation, we've already set off. We're currently less than a day away from Afternoon Town. When we arrive, we'll be resting for another day or two before we begin exploring the Giant King's court. The son's words made Alger, Catlia, and company suddenly feel like myths were entering reality. Compared to places like the ruins of the battlefield of the gods, the Giant King's court was a symbolic entity that appeared in various legends and in different secret documents. What secret was it hiding? What was buried in it? The answer was about to be revealed. Even though they had followed the World Gairman Sparrow into the City of Miracles Liveseed, which was on par with the Giant King's court, the Star Leonard and Justice Audrey were also secretly excited and looking forward to hearing more. After all, the city that the Dragon King had imagined into existence had lost too much in the process of being transferred to Groselle's travels. There were no traces of anything of value. Apart from the building itself, there was only the hall that expressed the extraordinariness of the ancient myths. Furthermore, what was even more important was that Derek had mentioned that the kings of angels had come to a secret plot in the Giant King's court. As for the fool Klein, he was thinking of something else. Should I get little son to pray to the fool before the exploration? Then, I'll use the Crimson Star and the Sea God Scepter to extend my vision to a certain distance so that I can watch a live broadcast. Yes. In that case, if there are any accidents, I can still provide some help. The only problem is that this method of relying on the prayer points of light for observation cannot last too long. This has nothing to do with my own spirituality. It's just that this connection will fade away with time and last 45 minutes at most. Let little son pray every once in a while. That's under the premise that it doesn't affect his battle or attract the attention of the people around him. In that case, my spirituality can probably last for 2 hours. It's not on the same level as my sequence 5. Heh, it's also because of my recent rapid digestion of the potion. After pondering for a moment, Klein didn't speak. He controlled the World Gairman Sparrow to hint to the sun before exploring the Giant King's court, you can pray to Mr. Fool and pray for good luck. In the process, you can also pray many times. Mr. World really is a nice guy. After Derek sincerely thanked him, he hurriedly turned his body towards the end of the long, model table. Then, he saw Mr. Fool, who was enveloped by the grayish-white fog, nod slightly. The world above the grey fog had been restored to its state of silence, as though the gathering that had just ended was an illusion. Klein bent his finger and lightly knocked on the edge of the long, model table. He made the pages of the Roselle diary which Katlia had just given appear once again. Amidst an indescribable stillness, Klein cast his gaze towards the first paragraph of the first page with a solemn expression. September 27th, I saw Miss Ithaca once again. I had a nerve-wracking and thrilling but sufficiently wonderful experience with her. As expected, I prefer women of this age. I'm not just reminiscing about my youth, but rather that I haven't changed after so many years. Heh, I'm really dedicated. I read your diary with such seriousness, and you're giving me this? The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he lampooned at the emperor who he had only seen a portrait of. He immediately gathered his thoughts and shifted his gaze. In a lounge at the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral. After Leonard Mitchell opened his eyes, he deliberated for a moment and said in a low voice, "Old man, the secret order's Zeradol seems to be in Backland." In his mind, the slightly aged voice quickly sounded, "Indeed." Upon hearing this, Leonard immediately asked, "Old man, are you familiar with that Zeradol? Didn't you say that the Zoroast family and the Zeradol family are both important nobles of the Solomon Empire?" From his point of view, as ex-colleagues and former comrades in arms, how could old man not be familiar with Zeradol? Palaz Zoroast scoffed. "I'm familiar with the Zeradol who died in the War of the Four Emperors. The one alive whose now should be his descendant. I might or might not have seen him before." Sigh, the Zeradol back then had already obtained clues regarding the second sequence, one beyonder characteristic from the true creator. He was waiting for the War of the Four Emperors to end before searching for it. If he succeeded, he would be considered a king of angels. Unfortunately, in the War of the Four Emperors, he directly encountered the existence from the Antigonus family who could be known as the half-fool, and Bethel Abraham was also involved. He could appear anywhere, anytime. If he hadn't been quickly banished and sealed by Evernight and Storm, I might not have survived to the end of the War of the Four Emperors either. The half-fool. Leonard's eyelids twitched when he heard this title as he thought of the entity above the grey fog for some baffling reason. He then forced himself to control himself and directed his thoughts to something else. Even from the description of a bystander, Mr. Dor was clearly one of the top existences among the kings of angels. It required two true deities to join forces to banish and seal him. There's a high chance that he was especially good at escaping, making it very difficult to kill. And back then, the battle situation was tense, so it was imperative to eliminate an enemy that posed a threat as soon as possible. Old man is reminiscing about the past, so he's feeling a little uneasy. He actually said so much in one breath. Amidst his thoughts, Leonard suddenly said, "I was left in Backland because they wished to use you to attract him on here." The wistful feelings in Palaz Zoroast's tone vanished as he clicked his tongue. "Who made this guess? I don't think it's you. However, it's not bad that you know how to use your own resources to probe for the truth. This is something I've been very familiar with ever since I joined the Nighthawks." Leonard replied inwardly but didn't say a word. Palaz Zoroast continued, "I guessed that too. To be honest, your ex-colleague's relationship with Evernight really confuses me. If it wasn't for how familiar the concealment forces that appeared that day was, I wouldn't have dared to make such a guess. With Zeradol and I in Backland, Amon will arrive soon too. It truly is a perfect triangle of balance." "What do you mean?" "The concealment forces used to deal with Amon came from the Evernight domain, not Mr. Fool. Does this point that there is a certain level of cooperation between Mr. Fool and the goddess, or is it that the faith of those higher up in the church actually to Mr. Fool?" Leonard suddenly felt a strong sense of confusion and puzzlement regarding his position in the grand scheme of things. Seeing that Pallas was also quite confused, he converged his thoughts and didn't ask any questions regarding this. He frowned and said, "Two sequence, one angels and a king of angels. Will this bring about a devastating disaster to Backlund?" He remembered that Amon was a terrifying existence that could kill countless people silently, and could even live happily as his victim. Using this as a reference, Zeradol, who was of a neighboring pathway, definitely possessed similarly terrifying powers. If he and Amon were to clash, half of Backlund or the entirety of Backlund could become the capital of death or the capital of bizarreness. Pallas Zoroast laughed and said, "Balance also means that everyone will be very restrained. Besides, it's very likely that Amon won't let his true body enter Backlund. At most, he will send a large number of avatars over. After all, the impossibility of a divine descent by Evemite doesn't mean that storm or steam can't." "What do you mean?" Leonard acutely grasped the key point in old man's words. Pallas Zoroast's tone suddenly became more relaxed. "Regardless of whether it's because of the war or for other reasons, Evemite is likely unable to interfere with the matters on the ground at the moment. Otherwise, why would she need to lure Amon over to form a balance? She directly set up a trap, and who knows, she might be able to capture Zeradol or scare the cowardly seer away." "Did something happen to the goddess?" Leonard suddenly turned nervous. The slightly aged voice replied, "It might not be a bad thing, and it might be a good thing." Without waiting for Leonard to ask further, Pallas Zoroast sighed again. "Amon was attracted to Backlund by me. What about Zeradol? What about me? I think Zeradol is also here because of you, and you're in Backlund because of me." Leonard pondered as he replied. "Heh, why do you think you're in Backlund?" Pallas immediately scoffed. Leonard immediately replied, "This is the arrangement of the church. It can't be the effect of the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics, right?" "That's not necessarily true." Pallas' tone turned a little stem. "Most of the time, the law of beyonder characteristic convergence will not directly show in places where you can sense it. Most of the time, it will influence fate. Just like when you board a train, you'll suddenly feel that the scenery along the way is beautiful and will get off the train in advance, resulting in you entering the small city. This might be because there are beyonders or mystical items of neighboring pathways around you. In other words, there are other things in Backlund that attracts you and Zeradol here, and through you, my fate is affected, causing me to be arranged by the church to stay in Backlund most of the time." Leonard asked in enlightenment, hoping to gain confirmation. Pallas Zoroast slowly sighed and said, "That possibility can't be ruled out." Above the grey fog, Klein soon flipped to a diary page of value, November 21st. "As I had made too many preparations in the early stages, I obtained that chaotic and terrifying Grade 0 sealed artifact even faster than I imagined. And then, after a difficult battle, and with some help, I finally restored it to a pure Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristic. In a few more days, the ritual will be completed. I should be able to advance to Sequence 1 Knowledge Emperor of the Mystery Prior Pathway." November 26th. Sunny and breezy. The ritual was very successful. I digested it thoroughly, and my anchors were even more stable. There weren't many difficulties during the entire process. I'm already a Sequence 1 angel, a Knowledge Emperor. Bernadette no longer has to worry about the influence of the hidden sage. She can abide by the words, "Do as you wish, but do no harm," and continue on this path. At the same time, the level of an angel at Sequence 1 means that I can greatly resist the notice and corruption from the cosmos. I can head to the Crimson Moon and see what's happening there. Regardless of whether Mr. Dorr is lying or not, everything points to the fact that the Crimson Moon is the key to the problem. If I wish to become a true deity, I have to figure out the reason. I'll make preparations for another 3 more days before attempting to land on the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Don't quote me on that. Upon seeing this, Klein recalled the hysterical diary page of Roselle. He began to suspect that it was written after the Emperor's landing on the moon. Putting down the remaining, unread diary pages, Klein began to use dream divination to recall the content he had read over the past year. He wanted to use the comparison to find clues to Roselle's abnormal mental state. Not long after, he saw a few lines of text in his dream. It was the last diary entry that was theoretically written by Roselle. I'm unable to give any actual suggestions because I myself can't see the true faces of the 7 deities or those evil gods. This might be partially related to the second blasphemy slate that the ancient organization hides. Unfortunately, one only have a rough idea of the hidden parts, and I'm unable to verify them. In this diary, the Emperor had even solemnly warned his friends to be careful of the moon. The dream suddenly shattered, and Klein snapped awake. There was an obvious look of fear in his eyes. He clearly remembered that, a long time ago, Roselle had confirmed that there was a hidden portion in the second blasphemy slate, July 19. The night of the blood moon. Mr. Dorr's answer allowed me to confirm one thing: in that ancient secret organization, the second blasphemy slate I saw wasn't complete. The Emperor forgot. No, how could he have forgotten such an important matter? He only appeared a little extreme, and he didn't have much of a problem. Why did this happen? Klein couldn't help but mutter to himself silently, having an inexplicable and terrifying feeling. The last diary entry, or rather, the Emperor Roselle who wrote that sentence seemed to be another person. Above the grayish-white that wasn't perturbed at all, Klein silently sat at the end of the long, model table, like a stone statue that had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Regarding the discovery he had just now, he felt a deep sense of fear from the bottom of his heart. He felt a chill rush out from the back of his head, spreading across his entire body, bringing with it obvious yet real shudders. It was as if he had witnessed a familiar friend become a stranger in a very short span of time. His actions were abnormal, as though he had been replaced by someone else. Of course, there was a clearer and more direct analogy in this aspect. It would be Leonard Mitchell coming to visit and discuss the matter regarding Pallas Zoroast as a monocle is suddenly taken out and then put on. Could it be that the Emperor was unknowingly corrupted after his ascension to the Crimson Moon, and he didn't notice it at all? He usually didn't show any abnormalities. Only through reminiscing about his past through his diary entries, analyzing his inner voice, and talking to himself would certain premonitions surface in his mind. Or could it be that this was a form of hypnosis by Adam? But Roselle was at least a sequence one when that happened. Klein couldn't help but lower his head to inspect himself. He imagined how another version of himself existed in his body without realizing it. He wasn't sure if this entity could be called a human. This truly is an extreme sense of horror. Klein slowly took a deep breath and forced himself to focus his attention on the diary pages of Emperor Roselle. Soon, he discovered something worth reading. 28th July. I attended that ancient secret organization's gathering once again. From the discussions among the members, I sensed a problem. Is it because I advanced too quickly that I'm relatively inexperienced? There are many things that I have never heard of before. Just like how they mentioned about the corruption from the cosmos and underground. This is the first time I know of their existence. I wonder how many of them are S1 or she's. Apart from a minority of the members, most of them don't like others knowing their levels. While others are communicating with each other, I asked old Mr. Hermes with a whisper, hoping to understand more about the corruption that stems from the cosmos and underground. Hermes told me that this isn't something I can come into contact with at my current level. Just learning about it alone will cause me to be corrupted. It's actually that scary. What could it be? I'm even more intrigued. That old Mr. later told me that the corruption that originates from underground can be ignored because it will fade with time. A long time ago, in the era when the ancient gods were active, powerful creatures had attempted to resolve this problem completely. In the end, it made things worse and caused tremendous losses. Later, they gave up on the idea of directly exerting influence, and they switched focus to sealing and guarding it. From that day forth, although accidents happened occasionally, it was stable overall. Today, even if there are no seals or guards, as long as no one comes close and tries to go deeper, there won't be any incidents of corruption. What a surprising situation. It appears it doesn't require the protagonist of this era to resolve this problem. Old Mr. Hermes mentioned the cosmos again and said that the situation there is more complicated, interesting, and more dangerous than I imagined. He said that even a Sequence 2 angel doesn't have much knowledge of the cosmos. They only have a general understanding of it. They aren't aware that, apart from the dangers, there are too many other things. If it wasn't for the fact that he once knew an existence that was good at wandering the cosmos and learned plenty of matters from that person, he wouldn't be able to tell me all of that. I was very curious, but I didn't hold much hope when I asked about the existence who was adept at wandering the cosmos. Old Mr. Hermes didn't hide the truth. He said that it was Mr. Dorr, Bethel Abraham. Mr. Dorr. I pretended not to know anything and asked about that person's level in a very casual tone. Hermes didn't answer directly. He only said that in the fourth epoch, even angels and demigods would address him by his name in private. Those who could make everyone address them by their titles are in a small minority, of which Mr. Dorr was one of them, aside from Evernight, Storm, Earth, and the other deities. Is that so? Mr. Dorr's level really isn't low. The corruption that stems from underground will naturally fade with time. Rhodes said that the gray fog gives it a feeling that resembles that of an object from underground. It hopes that I can explore the underground world after I return to my throne of divinity. As for Luca Brewster, he's certain that the higher the sequence, the greater the danger the underground world will bring. Klein tapped the edge of the long, mottled table with his fingers. He was increasingly puzzled about what was happening underground. Fortunately, Hermes's description, the state of the abandoned castle, and the attitude of the Evemite goddess seemed to indicate that the corruption that stems from underground would naturally dissipate. Leaving it alone was the best solution. Phew, then I shall temporarily put aside my worries regarding the underground world. Hermes's words and the bronze door deep in the City of Miracles corroborate with each other. The dragon of imagination Ankwelt had really tried to resolve the problem of the underground world, but ended up with fear and trauma. From the looks of it, the greatest possibility for the coming of the apocalypse is probably from the cosmos, and my current sequence doesn't qualify me to know of it. Amidst his thoughts, Klein sighed as he continued flipping through the diary pages in his hand. After reading a few pages, his eyes suddenly lit up and locked onto one of the pages. December 31st. The end of a year is the most suitable time to make a resolution and start a new story. I've already thought of where the 8 secret mausoleums should be built. I'm just clueless about the last one. This has to be more covert than the 8 previous ones, or else it will be meaningless. After a long thought, I thought of a place, the nameless island where Grimm was buried. Of course, the abyss is also an option. However, I can't find a living devil in the area that I can enter, so I can't force them to become my citizens and help me build a mausoleum. Ordinary humans can't survive there, and even powerful beyonders will find it difficult to resist the corrosive properties of the abyss itself. Regardless, the environment on that nameless island seems like a pretty good choice. The princes of abolition in the fourth epoch's understanding of citizens is too limited. The rule of an emperor is not only limited to humans and humanoid creatures, all living things should be my subjects. And there are many extraordinary creatures on that nameless island with no intelligence. They have long worshipped and followed me. I can totally drive them into building a secret mausoleum. When I wrote this, I suddenly recalled that experience. Because I dreamed of Grimm, I brought Edwards, Benjamin, and the others back to this nameless island and discovered that those extraordinary creatures lived together in harmony. They were gathered together and holding a ritual, and amongst them was the deceased Grimm. I was indeed shocked back then. I felt a fear that I hadn't felt in a long time, and everything appeared extremely bizarre. That time, William and Polly died. Only Edwards and Benjamin survived. If I hadn't already become powerful and controlled a Grade 0 sealed artifact, everyone would have perished along with them. The power of those beyonder creatures that affected that nameless island actually came from the cosmos, and those who were corrupted would return to the source after dying. Thankfully, the power from the cosmos could only project a small portion of it into the real world. I finally solved the problem and made that nameless island my secret base. Now, it's time to use it. After reading the diary, Klein didn't feel exhilarated that he had correctly guessed where Emperor Rozel's final mausoleum was. Instead, he frowned slightly. This was, on the one hand, because the corruption caused by the cosmos had truly appeared in front of him. On the other hand, the nameless island wasn't that secretive. Other than the Emperor, there were also the two survivors, Edwards and Benjamin. It didn't meet Rozel's requirements of complete secrecy. Before this, did Edwards and Benjamin pass away normally, resulting in them being unable to divulge any secrets, or was it that, after Rozel successfully built the mausoleum, he made these two subordinates stay on the island forever, resolving the problem of spirit channeling? Of course, if Rozel had the corresponding sealed artifacts or beyonder powers, he could also make them completely lose the corresponding memories. After a moment of silence, Klein flipped through the diary pages again in search of the coordinates to the nameless island. However, he didn't see the corresponding content when he reached the last page. Instead, there was a diary entry that vaguely revealed some of Rozel's thoughts in his later years. December 27th. I've been feeling uneasy recently because I have no confidence in what will happen next. I no longer yearn for help. I'm very satisfied if they can remain neutral. I have put myself in the most dangerous situation. This is an act of me taking initiative, but it is also a choice due to a lack of options. Sometimes, I'm very confused. How did I end up like this? Was I too extreme, or was this the only thing I could do? No, at this point in time, I can't be confused anymore. Apart from affecting my mindset and making the already slim chances even slimmer, it's meaningless. Now that I've reached this point, I can only continue on. If I succeed, it will naturally be sunshine and rainbows. Heh, all my hopes are placed on one sentence: life is possible by being in death's embrace. From the looks of it, the Emperor really chose the method of making use of one's revival after death to escape the madness and corruption. This is simply crazy. It's like he's playing a game of Russian roulette with all 6 chambers filled, hoping that one of the rounds misfire. People who don't like going to the extremes, or those who are good at coming up with all kinds of strange ideas, wouldn't consider the viability of this method. Perhaps it's because the enemy can't guess it that this might give the Emperor a sliver of a chance of living. Klein leaned back into his chair as he silently sat in the ancient palace for a while. After he slowly recovered his scattered thoughts, he considered how to find the nameless island. I remember that the person who visited the nameless island, Benjamin, seems to be from the Abraham family. This be asked via Miss Magician. Yes, I'll be meeting her soon. There's no need to specially get the fool to pass the message. I'll get Queen Mystic to ask the descendants of Edwards, William, and Polly. That will be more suitable. With this in mind, he surveyed the area and sighed before disappearing above the grey fog. Returning to the real world, Klein immediately took out a pen and paper and wrote a short letter: investigate the nameless island which led to the deaths of Grimm, William, and Polly. This can be done through the descendants of Edwards, Benjamin Abraham, and the descendants of the 3 deceased. This was a letter to Queen Mystic Bernadette, so Klein didn't write the reason. He believed that she would understand what this meant. After folding the letter, Klein casually found a candle and began the summoning ritual. After completing the setup, he placed the letter on the altar, took 2 steps back, and recited in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name an invisible creature that roams the upper realms, a strange spiritual body that is friendly to humans, a messenger that belongs solely to Bernadette Gustave. The moment he said that, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered. He instinctively activated his spirit vision with a mere thought. However, he didn't see anything. Then, he discovered that the letter placed on the altar had disappeared. Queen Mystic's messenger is very special. Next time, I'll switch to using my spirit body thread's vision. Klein was stunned for a second before he sighed inwardly. In the evening, under the illumination of the street lamps that lit up one after another, a carriage drove to the intersection of the Backlund Bridge area and East Borough and stopped by the side of the streets. Wearing a long dress and a dark cloak, Furs paid the fare of 3 soldi before alighting from the rental carriage. She walked slowly along the shadows of the street, preparing to make a large detour to escape from her imaginary stalker. At the end of the previous tarot gathering, she had swiftly overcome her laziness, packed up, and went out to visit her former teachers, classmates, and colleagues. As for the reason, there was no need for a special reason. It was very normal to care about friends and acquaintances after an air raid. And the reason why it wasn't last week was because, in the eyes of the ordinary citizens, the situation in Backlund was especially tense. There could be a new round of attacks at any moment, so everyone naturally tried their best not to leave the house. During the visit, Furs had originally planned on diverting the topic onto the strange tales at the hospital, but to her surprise, there was no need for her to do so at all. Her former teachers, classmates, and colleagues would usually chat about such matters on their own accord after some idle chatter, making one convinced that such illusions happened at every hospital. No, Furs knew that it wasn't an illusion, so she inexplicably felt horrified, suspecting that she would have nightmares at night. I don't have to make any major changes at all. As long as the patient's miraculous recoveries are changed to them having their physical wounds healed, only to have them go bonkers, it would make for an excellent horror story. Furthermore, it happens in a city that everyone is familiar with and also in the hospital that people often come into contact with in the city but exudes a terrifying atmosphere. It will result in perfect immersion. I can almost foresee another best-selling novel about to be BOM. I just don't know if I can write this genre well. The only problem is that this story will lack sufficient emotion. A female patient passionately kissing a face that's covered in mushrooms and weeds. Isn't that way too outlandish? Furs walked as she thought, entering a creative state of mind. At this moment, her vision blurred. She saw a figure walk out from the shadows in front of her where the gas lamps couldn't illuminate. The figure wore a black trench coat and a half-top hat. He had a deep-set face with cold facial features. Apart from his gold-rimmed glasses, he looked identical to the crazy adventurer of the 5 Seas, Gehrman Sparrow. Although Furs knew that Mr. World wouldn't hunt her and was here to fulfill the contract, she couldn't help but tense up. It was as though she had met her strictest teacher from back in her school days. Good evening. Her footsteps slowed down, but she still continued moving forward and greeted him. Klein nodded without a word. He turned around and walked into a secluded alley to the side. The gas lamps inside were already damaged so it was dark. Despite the dark environment, Furs similarly didn't say a word. She lowered her head slightly and followed behind Gehrman Sparrow at an adequate pace. When they reached the depths of the alley, Klein looked around and said in a deep voice, "Help me ask your teacher if he knows of this person, Benjamin Abraham. If he knows him, I want all his information and all the text and pictures he left behind." Okay. Furs was nervously waiting for Mr. World to teleport her somewhere else, but she never expected him to mention something else for no reason. She nearly failed to react. She didn't ask why and quickly nodded in agreement, as though she couldn't wait to do it. Then, she took a deep breath and continued waiting for Gehrman Sparrow to approach her. He grabbed her shoulder and began teleporting. But after a few seconds, nothing happened. Furs looked up in shock, only to see Mr. World still standing in front of her, looking at her. She then heard him say in a deep voice, "Write it now. Write it now." Furs didn't ask why as she subconsciously said, "I didn't bring any paper, a pen, envelope, or stamp with me." Before she could finish her sentence, the 4 items were thrown at her. Furs caught the items and took a few steps out. Using the gas lamps at the end of the alley which opened up to the roads and the hard wall, she quickly wrote the letter to her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. With both hands in his pockets, Klein waited patiently without any signs of impatience. In fact, he had long been lurking around Miss Magician without showing himself. According to the address Furs provided, he had been secretly monitoring her from the moment she left home in the afternoon. His monitoring was done by getting his marionettes to pray to see God Calvetua from time to time while his actual body stayed above the gray fog, using the prayer light dots to observe the situation around the magician. With the help of his true vision, Klein was currently certain that Zeradal hadn't targeted Miss Magician, thus, it was safe to make contact with her. After knowing that Miss Magician had met Zeradal's marionette, how could he be at ease and be daring enough to meet her and take her traveling? Now, he was certain that Zeradal had been attracted by the Abraham family's sealed artifact or Saint of Secrets bodies. As for a mere sequence 6 like the magician, she wasn't worthy of notice. Hence, she wasn't exposed. A few minutes later, Furs finished writing. She used a sticky herbal powder she carried with her to seal the envelope and pasted the stamp. "Do I throw it into the mailbox now?" Furs glanced at the cover of the letter with her teacher's address and real name and asked hesitantly. She felt that she had to do it herself. She couldn't hand it over to the world, or it might bring danger to her teacher. Of course, if Gehrman Sparrow insisted, Furs felt that there was nothing she could do. Even if she tore the letter apart, there was still a possibility of her being hypnotized or having her spirit channeled. Klein nodded indiscernibly. "Return after you're finished posting it." "Phew." Furs let out a long sigh of relief. Turning around, she ran towards the street and found the mailbox. After finishing all of this, she returned to the dark alley. Without waiting for Gehrman Sparrow to speak, she handed over the fountain pen and the remaining 2 stamps. She very quickly said, "1 was enough." Klein gave Miss Magician a look before he took the stamp and pen and calmly said, "This means that your teacher's residence is less than 100 kilometers from Backlund." Furza's expression froze. "What's the big deal? I also know that your teacher lives in Pritz Harbor, and there's a high chance that he hasn't moved away yet. As for why I gave you 3 stamp tickets, of course it was intentional." Klein muttered to himself before taking a few steps forward to stand in front of Miss Magician. He then reached out his left hand that was wearing a transparent glove and grabbed the lady's shoulder. Furs subconsciously lowered her head again. The surrounding colors immediately became saturated and layered while countless, indescribable figures flashed. When the things and colors she saw returned to normal, Furs instinctively raised her head to thank him. However, Gehrman Sparrow had already disappeared. Furs sized up her surroundings in a daze and realized that she was standing in an empty corner. In front of her was a door, and a din and the smell of alcohol were emitted from beyond the door. Furs pulled at her cloak and walked out the door with a hint of fear, only to see many men dressed as pirates. They had scimitars and guns, either hanging or lodged by their waist. While drinking hard liquor, they discussed the strengths of the fleets of Faysac and Lone in high spirits. Quite a number of beautifully dressed women were amongst them, like dancing butterflies. She was wearing a long, dark-colored cloak in a Backlund style. Her brown hair was long and slightly curled. She had a rather mature temperament, but her expression of fear made it seem like Furs was a lamb that had barged into a wolf pack. It was so disharmonious and eye-catching, and it quickly attracted the attention of many. She felt a little familiar with what those people had said to her. It was as if they were part of a language branch she had learned, but she couldn't understand them immediately. Where am I, what am I doing, who are they? As Furs was at a loss, a plump man squeezed over and said in broken Loanese, 10 soli, 1 night. Furs had been involved in many of the Beyonder circles over the years. Although she didn't know where she was, she knew very well what kind of situation she was in. The light in her eyes flickered strangely before they converged into one point. An indescribable aura emanated from her body, making the people around her subconsciously avoid her gaze. This was the authority of a judge, a qualitative change in the ability of an arbiter. Berserk Sea, Theros Island. Danitz hid in the shadows, watching the intelligence peddler, Bartz, in a serious manner. As a hunter who had shadow cloak, Danitz's hiding and monitoring abilities were always pretty good. Back then, he had even helped Gehrman Sparrow lay an ambush for Steel Mavati. At this moment, he didn't show any traces of himself, but he felt a little bored. He was eager for Anderson to switch with him as soon as possible. When will such a life end? Vice Admiral Ailment, hurry up and appear. No, not now. It's better to wait until Anderson arrives. Danitz did some introspection and rationally ended his prayer. He was worried that a pirate admiral at Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy would discover that he was hiding in the dark, and he lacked the courage and confidence to deal with her. Of course, if he wore the boxing glove, everything wouldn't be a problem. As long as he made the decision fast enough, fear and apprehension wouldn't be able to catch up to him. You seem very troubled. Suddenly, a voice rang beside Danitz's ear. Danitz jumped out of the shadows in shock as an orange flame quickly formed in his hand. At the same time, he cast his gaze to the source of the voice. He saw Anderson hiding in the woods. There were green vines stuck to his head that seemed to meld him with the environment. T. It was unknown if Danitz was cursing Anderson or himself. After venting his anger, he asked, "When did you come?" 2 minutes ago, Anderson replied with a smile. You hid well. I didn't manage to find you immediately, so I followed your hiding habits and casually asked you a question. Danitz was momentarily unsure if he should be proud or angry. He asked with mixed feelings, if I had remained calm just now, would you have failed to discover me? In theory, Anderson said with a smile, completely unfazed. But as an experienced hunter, there can't be only one way. Just as Danitz was about to ask what other solutions there were, he suddenly saw Bartz extinguish the candle and prepare to sleep. Minutes later, the figure of intelligence peddler, Bartz, appeared by the window in the darkness. With a nimble leap, he landed into the shadows outside the house. That was where Danitz had been hiding. Having re-entered the shadows, he was almost stepped on by his target. Bartz walked towards the sea under the cover of the shadows. T. Only then did Danitz appear, giving Bartz the middle finger. Anderson also left the woods. As he pulled out the branches from his head, he smiled at Danitz. I think we'll hit the jackpot tonight. Danitz glanced at the strongest hunter in the fog sea and nodded vigorously. I hope it's Vice Admiral Ailment. He used the shadows that were everywhere at night and immediately took the lead in following the intelligence peddler, along with Anderson. They maintained a perfectly adequate distance. Not too stupid. Anderson observed for a moment before chuckling. Danitz scoffed inwardly but didn't respond. He knew very well that this wasn't an occasion where they could afford to mock and provoke each other. 15 minutes later, Bartz arrived at the beach and stood there, staring at the dark blue sea under the crimson moonlight. He didn't wait too long. In the darkness of the sea, a huge outline appeared, gradually forming a black ship with a white flag fluttering in the air. On the flag, 2 ghostly blue flames burned within a pitch-black skull. The Black Death. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's flagship, Black Death. Danitz instantly became excited. If not for his shadow form, his pupils definitely would have dilated in a bid to draw in more light to see every detail of the ship. He subconsciously moved a distance forward, hoping to confirm if Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy was on the ship. As the gigantic sailboat approached, the 2 people in the shadows could see sailors busy on the deck. Is there a dock for docking here? Or will they just give Bartz a dinghy and get him to row himself over? Just as these thoughts flashed through Danitz's mind, he heard Anderson say with a suppressed voice, "Leave." Ah. Danet's greatest strength was that he was good at following the instructions of an authoritative figure. Be it in front of Edwina Edwards or Gehrman Sparrow, he would follow the instructions to a T, apart from grumbling at most. At that moment, although his face was filled with puzzlement, with the intention to retort and persist in his own plans, he still used the shadows to silently leave the beach. When they could no longer see the Black Death and could only hear the vague crashing of the waves, did Danets leave the shadows and appear in the forest. He hurriedly asked, "Aren't we going to confirm if Vice Admiral Ailment is aboard?" Anderson sized up Danets and chuckled. Never underestimate a beyonder who's very famous at sea but has lived to this day. Every pirate admiral is a target you must be careful against. You must never be careless. Danet subconsciously replied, "Admiral of Blood Senior, Admiral Hell Ludwell." They were all pirates who were easily killed by a particular crazy adventurer. Anderson was momentarily at a loss for words to rebut Danets with. After a few seconds, he said, "So, isn't Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy worth paying more attention to considering how she survived Gehrman Sparrow's attack?" Happy face after careful thought, Danets inexplicably felt that Anderson's words made sense. Just as he was about to speak, his throat suddenly felt itchy as he coughed. After coughing a few times, his throat began to swell in pain, and he could taste metal. "Look, I told you to be careful." Anderson clenched his fists and held them to his mouth. He coughed lightly, but it wasn't as serious as Danet's. Tracy must have spread all kinds of ailments around the ship. Once anyone approaches it, they'll quickly be infected with it and be exposed. With this wide of a range, it means that she has completely digested the Sequence 5 potion and has a chance of advancing to Sequence 4. Why couldn't it be that she has already advanced to Sequence 4? As he was far from the source of the infection, Danets quickly recovered and instinctively retorted. "If that were the case, you are either on the Black Death, or you have a victim of the Black Death disease and are on your deathbed." Anderson half turned his body and cast his gaze towards the obstructed beach. Tracy must have used some sort of trick. It's unlikely for her to only be able to maintain the target area of the ailments to be at the front and not the other three directions. Instead, she used the wind to spread the ailments to affect the people on the shore. With that said, Anderson clapped his hands and smiled again. "Isn't our encounter proof that Vice Admiral Ailment is on the ship? You can inform Gehrman Sparrow." Danets didn't hesitate any further. He immediately set up a ritual and summoned the messenger. Using the excuse of guarding the area to prevent any accidents, Anderson walked out of the forest. It was 3 in the morning in Backlund's East Borough. Apart from the moonlight and starlight, it was pitch black. Wearing cotton pajamas and a sleeping cap with a protective hairnet, Klein sat on the bed and received the letter from Rionette Tynker without asking anything. Opening the letter, he calmly got out of bed, took out a pen from his pocket, and wrote on the back of the letter, "Return to the port city and await further instructions." After watching Miss Messenger leave, he calmly changed into his shirt, put on his vest, tied his bow tie, and put on his black trench coat. Then, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. Using the topaz spirit pendulum to divine the danger level of this operation, he received almost no revelations. Without any hesitation, he returned to the real world and stood in front of the mirror. He picked up his half-top hat and wore it above his head. On the bunk bed in the room outside, Konas and Inuni opened their eyes. In an empty room on the Black Death, a figure quickly outlined itself. He had black hair and brown eyes with cold and hard facial features. He was none other than Gehrman Sparrow. Under the dim crimson moonlight, Klein swept his gaze and casually found a chair to sit down as he admired the sea vista outside. In the captain's cabin 1 level away, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, who was dressed in a white blouse and beige pants, watched Bartz leave the room in disgust. She pulled at her collar out of reflex, and her expression turned livid. She had just learned that Blazing Danets and the strongest hunter Anderson had been staying in Theros Island recently with unknown motives. They're all related to Gehrman Sparrow. Is that fellow looking for me? Tracy narrowed her eyes as she walked towards the window without any hesitation. She was prepared to instruct the sailors on the deck to steer the ship away from these waters. At this moment, her thoughts suddenly turned sluggish. It was as if she had sunken into a state where she knew she was in a dream but was unable to extricate from it no matter how hard she struggled. Not good. Black flames abruptly emerged from the surface of Tracy's body, attempting to burn away any external influences. However, while the flames were initially able to flow smoothly, they later began to turn intermittent as they kept falling to the ground like withered petals. A strong sense of despair surged within Tracy as her thoughts turned increasingly slower. Desperate, she quickly condensed a layer of crystalline ice around her body, retracting the invisible threads towards her and wrapped herself in layers. At that moment, the door to the captain's cabin creaked open. Wearing a silk top hat and black trench coat, Gairman Sparrow walked in. Then, he politely closed the door. With a light cracking sound, the entire captain's cabin instantly became extremely quiet. The sound of crashing waves was no longer present, as though they had been separated from the real world. As for the invisible spider webs that entangled Tracy, they seemed to misunderstand the order that was given as they tightly bound Vice Admiral Ailment up, preventing her from moving or using her beyond her powers. Distortion. As her thoughts returned to normal, her brain no longer felt frozen. What do you want to do? She couldn't hide her fear as she watched Gairman Sparrow slowly approach. What she couldn't understand was why the other party would give up on the attempt to make a marionette even though she had clearly lost her ability to resist. The reason why Klein did so was because he was worried that Vice Admiral Ailment and the Demoness of White were related by blood. This way, Tracy's death would cause the demigod who was good at hexes to sense something and take measures ahead of time. Tap. 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 Klein stopped in front of the Demoness. Gairman Sparrow's silence made Tracy's heart sink, as though she had fallen into an ice cavern. When he saw despair surface on Vice Admiral Ailment's face, Klein took out a piece of paper from his pocket. With a flick of his wrist, he made it fly forward like a poker card. With a whoosh, the slip of paper cut through a tiny portion of the invisible spider webs like a piece of metal. It tore open the translucent ice crystal and lacerated Tracy's left arm, causing blood to splatter. The surface of the paper was quickly dyed with a bright red tinge before it boomeranged back from the trapped Demoness into Klein's palm. Tracy originally imagined that the piece of paper would come at her throat, but she never expected it to only target her arm. She was momentarily stunned. Only when Gairman Sparrow folded the piece of paper and placed it into an iron cigar case did she suddenly realize something. She asked, "Your true target is Katerina?" Klein placed the iron cigar case back into his pocket without answering her. He calmly asked, "You are her descendant?" Upon hearing this, Tracy, who was still trapped by the ice crystal and spider silk, suddenly let out a low laugh. "I'm not just a descendant. I'm her child." Child, daughter, as Klein rejoiced over his caution in not recklessly killing her, causing Demoness of White Katerina to sense something, he subconsciously analyzed whether Katerina was the mother or father of the ailment maiden. If Katerina was also formerly a male, it's possible that she's Tracy's father, but the problem is that she was already a Sequence 4 demigod during the Pale disaster that was at the end of the 4th epoch. And for the assassin pathway, a man will change into a woman at Sequence 7 which. In other words, if Katerina is Tracy's father, Tracy needs to be at least 300 years old. However, it's impossible for a Sequence 5 Beyonder to live for so long. Even most Sequence 4 and Sequence 3 saints aren't capable of that. There's only one answer, and that is that Tracy was born by Katerina. Also, it happened in the past few decades. An advanced maternal age of more than 1,000 years. Klein nodded slightly and confirmed without any change in expression. "She's your mom?" Tracy's expression suddenly turned odd. "No, my mother." Just as he was about to ask what was the difference between that and mother, since it was essentially a more formal and eloquent manner of speech. Tracy sneered and said, "My mom is another person. She used to be my father. You demonesses have messed up families. But that isn't the reason why you spread catastrophes to the world." Klein used his clown powers to control his facial muscles as he continued looking at ailment maiden, his face impassive. Tracy, who was already in a dire situation, was now beginning to abandon herself to despair. Without waiting for Gehrman Sparrow's response, she sighed and gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Maybe it was all a mistake since I was born. Abnormal parents, abnormal family relationship, abnormal sect members. They sculpted me and harmed me. At the age of 8, one found out that my father, who I had always admired as a role model, had suddenly become a woman. He was becoming like a dainty flower by the day, becoming more and more adept at using his charms. Later on, he even found a male friend and gave birth to my younger brother. Can you imagine that kind of feeling? After I ran away from home and came to the sea, I finally found a normal sense of self-recognition and a social identity after many years of hard work. I finally understood what I really wanted. Then, a potion bottle turned me into a woman." "Heh, a woman." After listening quietly, Klein said without changing his tone, "Your instigation skills are pretty good." Tracy turned agape, but in the end, she only sighed and smiled with a complicated expression. "I admit that I was trying to win your sympathy. Everyone wants to live. Isn't that right? However, I didn't lie. That was my life experience." She stopped exaggerating her pain and sadness and paused. "Before you kill me, I would like to ask you a question. It's a question that won't put you in a difficult spot." "What is it?" Klein looked at the demoness and asked. Tracy hesitated for a moment before finally asking, "Before you came to assassinate me the previous time, did Helene know about this?" Klein was silent for a moment before he said, "She didn't know what would happen." Tracy's face suddenly glowed. "Really?" Before Gehrman Sparrow could respond, she revealed an extremely complicated expression. "Before I die, can I ask you for another favor? If you can see her again, tell her that I feel very guilty about what happened in the past, but I don't regret it." At this point, Tracy tried to shake her head, but failed thanks to the restriction provided by the crystalline ice and invisible spider webs. She could only laugh at herself. "Forget it, there's no need to tell her. Let's leave it at that. You can do what you were here for." With that, Tracy closed her eyes. After a few seconds, she didn't feel the pain she expected. Instead, she heard Gehrman Sparrow say in a deep voice, "Say this, no one is to disturb me." Tracy was surprised as she felt perplexed, and it showed on her face. However, since she was already facing death, such a small matter wasn't worth nitpicking about. She opened her mouth and said, "No one is to disturb me." As soon as she said the statement, the same voice echoed on the Black Death, greatly amplified. The pirates didn't have any doubts about this. It was as if they were following a specific pattern. They instinctively avoided the captain's cabin and continued their work. Since the captain said not to disturb her, they naturally wouldn't seek her out. At the same time, Tracy saw Gehrman Sparrow take off his top hat and press it to his chest. He bowed slightly at her, as though he was bidding her farewell. Then, she felt as though she was isolated from the entire world. There was silence. Even the crazy adventurer was gone. She had obtained the environment of not being disturbed just as she wanted. The magnify and distortion powers of the lawyer pathway. The layer of ice on Tracy's body began to melt, but the invisible spider webs continued to bind her firmly, preventing her from doing anything. She couldn't even change her center of gravity. Hence, she could only stand there like a lifelike wax statue. "He didn't kill me." Tracy looked ahead blankly, momentarily in disbelief. She didn't believe that Gehrman Sparrow hadn't taken action because he pitied her. This crazy adventurer had killed many pirates, and there had never been a situation where he showed mercy. As for Tracy, although she believed that she wasn't the typical demoness and didn't live up to her status as a demoness, how could she not have done anything bad as a pirate? She was experienced in both the slave trade and in plundering ships. Similarly, Tracy didn't believe that Gairman Sparrow was moved by her beauty and her experiences, and had ended up coveting her, because his cold gaze was like he was looking at a dead person. There must be other factors. A thought flashed through her mind as she made connections with matters she might be involved in. She quickly came to a conclusion. It's likely because of my blood relationship with Mother. As for demonesses, they're all good at hexes. Once I die, Mother will immediately notice it. When she discovers that there's a problem here, she will make preparations ahead of time, preventing Gairman Sparrow from finding his target during his subsequent actions. That's why he allowed me to live but made it impossible for me to contact anyone else. From the looks of it, regardless of the outcome of his operation targeted at Mother, he will return to kill me. And if I want to continue living, I have to succeed in saving myself before that happens. In Tracy's heart, she didn't have much of a relationship with her mother, Katerina. This demoness of unaging had lived for a long time, and most of the time, she had maintained her youthful state of mind by dating young men. She was passionate about the occasional children that she had whenever she found it novel to have one. At other times, she was mostly indifferent. However, as she grew older, Katerina's evaluation of Tracy was that she resembled her past self more and more. Hence, she was doted on her and provided more help. However, Tracy didn't want such attention. It only served to make her lose her original gender, putting her into a painful situation that she couldn't shake off. Phew. Although I hate her and blame her, I still unknowingly rely on her, hoping that she can respect my opinion more. I hope that she can escape Gairman Sparrow's pursuit. Tracy once again began to struggle in an attempt to escape her bound state. On the one hand, she was trying to save herself. On the other hand, she wanted to inform her mother to be careful of Gairman Sparrow as soon as possible. Of course, Tracy found it questionable that Gairman Sparrow, who had likely advanced to Sequence 4 recently, would be able to harm her mother. She was, after all, someone who had survived since the 4th epoch, and was a demoness with the title of unaging. However, she didn't only pin this belief on hope alone. This was because Gairman Sparrow had helpers, such as the Death Consul who even her mother feared. Plop. Tracy finally collapsed on the ground and tried to roll towards the desk. But no matter how hard she tried, she was unable to roll her body. The person she was fighting against was none other than herself, she who had been distorted and magnified. Above the gray fog, Klein had already taken his seat in the high-back chair of the fool. He placed the paper stained with Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's blood on the surface of the long, model table. Following that, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote a divination statement, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's mother, Katerina's current location. Putting down the pen, he held the 2 pieces of paper and leaned back into his chair. He closed his eyes and repeated the words he had written. After repeating it 7 times, he entered a dream. He saw a tall and towering Gothic bell tower appear in the grey world. Around the bell tower, the white-robed Katerina stood in the shadows of a few houses. She observed the surroundings with a heavy expression, as though she was searching for something. As for the crimson moon hanging high in the sky, its position was identical to what he had seen before entering the grey fog. This meant that demoness of White Katerina was still in Backlund. She was in Westborough, in search of a particular target. After ending the divination and returning to the real world, Klein walked to the room outside the rental flat. There, he pondered for nearly a minute while looking at the crimson moon in the night sky. Perhaps, there's still another chance for digesting the potion, he muttered silently as he ultimately rummaged for something. He took the 2 marionettes and disappeared into the shadows. In Backlund, he no longer dared to use Flaming Jump, afraid that it might catch Zeradal's notice. After all, it was impossible for him to always have an opportunity to ignite Will Ossepton's paper crane to protect himself. This was a sign of disrespect towards the Snake of Fate, and it was easy for Dr. Aaron's family to be targeted if he kept visiting them. In the blink of an eye, Klein appeared at the back of the tall, Gothic-styled bell tower in his dream. He hid in the shadows, one formed by the Bell of Order, a symbol of Backlund. Immediately following that, he and his two marionettes split apart, each occupying different hidden spots. After doing all of this, Klein quickly turned a rat into a marionette, allowing it to run to the edge of the range of his control. It opened its mouth and softly chanted an honorific name, the great god of war, the symbol of iron and blood, the ruler of chaos and strife. Demoness of White Katarina is in this area. Since Klein was fulfilling his agreement with the Red Angel evil spirit, he also hoped that this high-level creature would step into a trap that might possibly be for him. At the same time, he had some doubts about Sauron Einhorn Medici's true intentions. He had no intention of urgently getting help from the Church of Evernight or Queen Mystic. He planned on watching from the sidelines to confirm the situation, lest he implicated others into springing a trap. Just as the prayer ended, the grey rat suddenly twitched and fell quietly beside the rubbish bin. It had already lost its life and was no longer Klein's marionette. This was a way to prevent himself from being marked by the Red Angel evil spirit. As for him, after giving up on that rat marionette, he immediately left the area where the Bell of Order was located with Konas and Inuni. He also made the winner pray to see God Calvetua a few kilometers away. After the prayer, the two of them continued to retreat, widening their distance. Then, Klein hid in a storage room in a particular house, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey fog to sit at the position of the Fool. He then beckoned for the Sea God Scepter. With the help of the prayer light of the winner, he expanded his scope and observed the target area. At the same time, with his other hand, he held the piece of paper that was stained with Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's blood. With a medium like this, and a general scope, it didn't take long under his true vision before he found the hidden demoness of White Katarina. The black-haired, blue-eyed woman was dressed in a pure white robe. She looked like a weightless feather, and she was gently drifting across the streets and alleys. Even if the patrolling policemen looked in the right direction, they were unable to detect her presence. If it wasn't for the grey fog's help, Klein could only use spirit body threads to see through the invisibility to a certain extent. Taking a deep breath, he patiently waited for the Red Angel evil spirit to appear. He also observed Katarina, wanting to know what she was looking for. He suspected that the Demoness of White was targeting Trissy Cheek. Seconds changed to minutes as the crimson moon gradually tilted to the side. Having wandered around the Bell of Order for a while without finding anything, Katarina revealed a slightly frustrated and disappointed expression. She looked as though she was about to leave that area at any time. And the Red Angel evil spirit never appeared. This Sauron Einhorn Medici was just lying to me. He really didn't have the Demoness of White as his goal. No, that's not necessarily the case. If that happened, then his condition would be meaningless. The Red Angel evil spirit has actually arrived at the scene, but has chosen not to immediately take action like me. He is waiting for the battle between Katarina and me and my companions to reach its most intense state before suddenly appearing to reap the greatest benefits. Klein's thoughts wandered as he came up with a guess. He suspected that the Red Angel evil spirit was as cautious, careful, and staid as he was. He hoped to be the fisherman pulling in the net and not that net. This is really troublesome. Next, it will depend on who's more patient. Klein muttered silently as he continued to observe the situation around the Bell of Order through the prayer light. Tick. 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 The second hand was beating at the same pace in the quiet night. Demoness of White Katarina's expression turned increasingly gloomy. Suddenly, she cast her gaze on the glass window of a building. The dim night was like a mirror reflecting the things in front of them. Katarina's beautiful blue eyes sparkled slightly as the surface of the mirror instantly turned dark, as though there were countless objects and layers of space hidden within. The glass window seemed to have become a passageway to an alternate world. With a thought, together with the various beyonder powers that Demoness Trissy had showcased, he suspected that Katerina was about to use the mirror world to leave this place and end her hunt tonight. How can the Red Angel evil spirit still endure this? Klein tensed up as he instinctively wanted to put down the sea god scepter and return to the real world. He wanted to act against the Demoness of White and prevent her from leaving. As this thought flashed through his mind, he ultimately didn't move. He felt that he could still wait a little longer because even if Katerina left the surrounding area of the Bell of Order, he could still locate her again as long as she didn't discover that something had happened to her daughter. When the time came, he could first summon a Rhodes to ask about the target's actual abilities and items. Then, he could either seek the help of Queen Mystic Bernadette or the Church of Evernight to borrow a Grade 1 sealed artifact. He could then make the scales of victory tip towards him before taking action. I deliberately didn't hide my operation this time. If I were to borrow a sealed artifact and the Archbishop assents to it, that means that the goddess's true attitude towards George III is, she doesn't like the king becoming the Black Emperor, but she can only accept it silently. If someone is willing to disrupt the ritual, she is willing to provide some help. Klein calmed his slightly anxious feelings, allowing his observation to become more relaxed. At that moment, Demoness of White Katerina's expression returned to normal. She floated to the glass window and entered without any corporeal form. The layers of illusory worlds within the mirror converged as though they were constantly moving away. At this moment, using his true vision to observe the area underneath, Klein seemed to hear a shrill female scream. This cry seemed to come from another world. It contained extreme fear and disbelief. None of the residents in the surrounding area were jolted awake. No one heard anything. That was Katerina's scream. What exactly happened to her? Klein's gaze froze as he thought of something. The Red Angel evil spirit is also an evil spirit, and it's also capable of using mirror blink, thus, using this medium. In other words, he is no stranger to the mirror world. Could it be that Sauron Einhorn Medici had been hiding in the mirror all this time, waiting for the Demoness of White to throw herself into a trap? As his pupils dilated, the darkness and gloominess in the glass window disappeared. The mirror had lost its unique characteristics and returned to its original state. A few seconds later, the bottom of the glass window slowly bled, forming a liquid that slid down. In the areas that the liquid passed, the surrounding grayish-white tint spread, covering its original pale yellow color. It was like a newly embedded stone. Drip. 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 The drops of liquid landed on the ground, dyeing it bright red like blood, beautiful like flowers. Upon seeing this scene, the muscles on Klein's face twitched slightly before he forced himself to use his clown powers to control his expression. This ending was really unexpected. A powerful and senior Sequence 3 saint, one who had lived for more than 1,000 years, was unable to put up any resistance in front of the Red Angel evil spirit's trap. There was only silence left. As for Klein himself, even if he counted the 2 marionettes and the sealed artifacts he possessed, he was still a little weaker when compared to Katerina's strength. He needed to make up for this gap through prior preparations. This also meant that, if he were to face the Red Angel evil spirit, he would probably not end up any better. He would similarly be powerless and puny, slowly sinking in the torrent that followed. Is this what a former king of angels is? Even though his strength has yet to recover to its peak state, it still leaves one in such despair. Seeing the blood seeping out from the glass window gradually lessen, he took a deep breath and returned to the real world. Following that, he and Winner and Nuni exchanged positions as he teleported to the glass window. When Bizarro sorcerers switched positions, they could only choose 2, swapping their bodies or bodies and external objects. However, it was impossible to be too precise at his current level, so Klein wasn't able to leave behind whatever he wanted. He could only choose to leave everything or not leave anything behind. Enuni, who wore Gehrman Sparrow's appearance, said to the glass window in a deep voice the moment he materialized in front of it, "I have already fulfilled my promise." A figure suddenly appeared on the glass window. He was wearing a long black robe with red stripes. He casually wore a hood, revealing a soft outline. His skin was brown, and he had a pale face. He was the gatekeeper who had been possessed by Sauron Einhorn Medici. "Well done," the young man walked down from the window and said with a smile. Upon hearing this, Klein took out something from his pocket. The corners of his mouth curled up as he happily replied, "You did well too." As he spoke, he blew at the monocle in his hand and wore it on his left eye. Sauron Einhorn Medici's smile froze. For a moment, the cold night became abnormally scorching hot, as though invisible lava was surging within it. However, everything quickly returned to normal. The Red Angel evil spirit sized up Klein and smiled as if nothing had happened. "I'll say it again. You have talent in being a provoker. Back when Zeradal digested the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion, even he didn't dare to pretend to be a mon in front of me." There wasn't a hint of anger in his tone. He didn't mention why Zeradal didn't dare to do so, but with his gaze sweeping across Klein, it was as if he had fallen deep inside a glacier, his body freezing in the process. This was how his actual body felt. Even though he was separated by a marionette, the back of his neck and back still had goosebumps. Without needing Sauron Einhorn Medici to say anything else, Klein understood the hidden meaning behind his words. Anyone who dared to use such a method to scare him would suffer the punishment of steel and blood on the spot. Looking at the Red Angel evil spirit in front of him who had a converged aura but was giving off a feeling of an extremely high level of superiority, Klein couldn't help but inwardly mutter, "If it wasn't for the fact that the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion had been digested to a certain extent, I would have thought that your willpower was as strong as steel and that your strength has returned to the level of at least a sequence 1. And now, I can basically confirm that, under your calm demeanor, you're hiding a strong fear towards Amon. This also means that your current level is at most at sequence 2. Besides, I was already mentally prepared to lose a marionette. In order to quickly digest the potion, I had to take the risk. If Danitz was here and he was given the opportunity to shout out, 'Coward, Weiss,' he could probably quickly digest the Provoker Potion even if he had drunk 4 or 5 bottles. Without further agitating the Red Angel evil spirit, Klein smiled and took off the monocle. Back in the Solomon Empire, Zeradal should already be an angel. How would he still need to digest the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion? "I'm talking about the young Zeradal," Sauron Einhorn Medici said casually. "This is consistent with the description from the grandpa in Leonard's body." Klein nodded indiscernibly and focused on the main topic at hand. "You've already finished off the Demoness of White. What do you think?" The Red Angel evil spirit laughed and said, "Also, one must be polite. Since Katarina calls herself the Saintess of White, then you shouldn't call her a Demoness anymore. Polite. A hunter emphasizing manners with me." At that instant, the corners of Klein's mouth twitched, expressing the ludicrousness of the matter, but he ultimately held back. From the looks of it, provoking isn't limited to ridiculing and cursing others. Danitz, who only knows how to curse using one word, is a disgrace to hunters. As he thought, Klein said, "I've already fulfilled my promise. I think you don't mind giving me a small reward." "Reward?" The Red Angel evil spirit scoffed and asked. Klein ignored his attitude and continued, "I wish to communicate with the Demoness of White. I want to ask her something. Just this request." The Red Angel evil spirit asked in amusement. Klein nodded. "That's right. No problem." Sauron Einhorn Medici raised his right hand and grabbed at his glabella. From there, a blurry figure was pulled out. It was none other than Saintess of White Katarina, whose facial expression was filled with horror. "Can we have a private conversation?" Seeing this, Klein looked around. The Red Angel evil spirit immediately laughed and said, "Do you need a room where the two of you can be together? Think about it with that brain of yours." Even if you want to hide the questions you would like to raise from me, I can still find out through Katerina's spirit. That is, of course, unless you don't plan on returning her to me. Or are you a little boy who needs things to follow a ritual? Klein made the marionette reply with a deadpan expression, I have a way to make her forget my questions. This was both the truth and a lie. The truth was that he could use Vin Rambise's manipulators beyond her characteristic to complete the job. However, it was relatively difficult, and the chance of failure was very high. Furthermore, the negative effects weren't minor. The reason why he lied was because he had no intention of doing so. This would expose many important matters. He only had one purpose in saying this, to make the Red Angel evil spirit suspect that the answers obtained weren't the truth and that there were key hidden parts beneath the surface. From that, he would ignore the value of the answers obtained on the surface. This worked wonders on people who were highly suspicious. Of course, there was no hope of success. After all, the entity opposite him was the Red Angel who was master of conspiracies. Not bad. After Sauron Einhorn Medici heard Klein's reply, his body suddenly vanished, projecting itself onto the glass window. Klein glanced at the blood that had already coagulated on the grey stones, feeling somewhat wistful as he brought the somewhat muddle-headed demoness of White Katerina far away from the glass and into a dark alley. He then took out candles, essential oils, and herbal powders. He set up an altar and prayed to the Evernight goddess, hoping that he could use ritualistic magic to complete the mediumship. This was a skill he had mastered when he was still a Nighthawk. As the ritual was completed, an immense and terrifying power descended from an indescribable height, causing the surroundings to become unusually quiet. Klein's eyes instantly darkened, as it was like the dark night was compressed. He then saw more things around Katerina's spirit, flickering light and blurry mind storms. He easily passed through those obstacles and faced the demoness of White's body of heart and mind. Has the cooperation between the demoness sect and George III come to an end? Without being careless, Klein began from a less sensitive question to observe Katerina's condition. The dazed and confused look on Katerina's face faded a little as she nodded with a pure smile. Yes. Then why are you still in Backlund? Klein asked further. Katerina replied solemnly, I'm in pursuit of Trissy. She took an important sealed artifact from us. What's the sealed artifact? Klein suddenly recalled the sapphire ring that demoness Trissy had once worn on her hand. It was intricately made. Demoness of White Katerina said with a pious expression, it has something to do with the awakening of Primordial. Apart from its high level at grade 0, it doesn't have any special abilities. Indeed, it has to do with the Primordial Demoness. You people even changed Trissy's name to Trissy Cheek. Klein didn't reveal that he knew the true name of the Primordial Demoness. Instead, he asked, do you know where the other 8 mausoleums of George III are? Katerina frowned slightly and answered in a manner meant to garner sympathy, they're separately located in the southwest suburbs of Backlund, Alwa County, East Chester County. This demoness of White first gave a simple account of the locations of the 8 mausoleums before introducing their specific locations and situations in detail. The 8 mausoleums have already been repaired. They temporarily deactivated the teleportation tunnel. Even if they have the corresponding charms, there's no way to open them again. It's almost impossible to find them directly from the outside world. Other than Prince Grove, Duchess Georgina, the 2 angels of the royal family, and George III, no one else can enter. Well, some of those places were places where Conas Kilgore often went hunting, so it matches my guess. This means that the demoness of White isn't lying. I'll make a confirmation above the grey fog later. If this is really the case, it would be quite troublesome. With the current situation, be it Prince Grove or Duchess Georgina, they would definitely be in the sights of the angels. The biggest hurdle is entering the ruins. Once entry is gained, what follows won't be that dangerous. War has already broken out, and there's a need to fight against the Phasacians. Demigods are a limited resource, so there's no way George III can have every ruin be guarded by a saint, with the option of an angel to provide reinforcements. As Klein's thoughts raced, he first posed a question: the royal family has 2 angels? In fact, that's not the case. It's very likely that George III is also one, Katerina replied honestly. One of those 2 angels is the founder of the Lone Kingdom, Protector William I, who has survived since the 4th epoch. He is a sequence 1 hand of Order of the Arbiter pathway, while the other is the former Duke of Southville, Blink Augustus. He is a sequence 2 balancer. As for how many grade 0 sealed artifacts the royal family has, I'm not sure. The founder on the 10-pound note is still alive. I have the feeling that history has seeped into reality again. After some thought, he nodded and asked, why are you working with George III? For a conqueror beyond our characteristic. It's already in our hands. Katerina's expression became a little excited. Conqueror was the name of the Red Priest Pathways Sequence 1 potion. Then, will it belong to the primordial demonis, or belong to the upper echelons of your sect? Klein asked thoughtfully. Who are the higher-ups of your sect? It will be sacrificed to primordial. However, we have to find the sealed artifact that Trissy took away first. Currently, it has been kept by the Saintess of Black. All the higher-ups of our sect have colors as their code names. Katerina answered truthfully. After understanding more details, Klein terminated the spirit channeling, cleaned up the altar, and allowed the demoness of white spirit to return to the glass window from before. As for himself, his body suddenly turned transparent. With the help of teleportation, he disappeared from this region, rendezvousing with his actual body in his other marionette. After watching Gehrman Sparrow leave, the gloominess and confusion on Katerina's face suddenly vanished as her expression became extremely astute. She then entered the glass window which had turned dark again. A few seconds later, Sauron Einhorn Medici and Demoness of White Katerina walked out of the mirror together. The latter's figure was clear and filled with flesh. She showed no signs of death. Are you saying that he was asking about the other 8 secret mausoleums of George III? The power of the spirit channeling came from Evernight? The Red Angel Evil Spirit stroked his chin and turned to ask Katerina. The Demoness of White nodded slightly and said, that's right. Heh. The Red Angel Evil Spirit immediately laughed. So he doesn't want George III to become the Black Emperor. Katerina's eyes darted around as she revealed a smile. But it's impossible to succeed. No matter how fast he advances or how much help he receives, there's no way he can resist the combined forces of the royal family, the military, and that organization. No, if it's just the Augustus family, with his level and strength, he won't be able to do anything, unless Evernight personally descends. Having said that, this Demoness of White asked in a seemingly casual manner, I'm very puzzled. Why didn't you kill me directly after grasping the absolute advantage over me? The Red Angel Evil Spirit glanced at her as the corners of his mouth slowly curled up. Do you think you have the right to be my true target?